In 1825, a French zoologist opened a crate in Paris and looked at an animal nobody in Europe had a name for. He studied its rust-colored fur, its ringed tail, its masked face. Then he wrote that it was the most beautiful animal he had ever examined. He called it Ailurus fulgens, shining cat, and gave it a name borrowed from the mountains it came from, Panda. 48 years later, on the other side of the world, another animal would be discovered. Black and white. The size of a small bear. Scientists needed a name for it too, and they reached for the one already sitting on a shelf. They took it. And over the next century, the world quietly forgot which animal the word actually belonged to. Today, if you say panda, almost nobody pictures the original. They picture the imposter. And that's only the first thing about this animal that isn't what you think it is. It survives almost entirely on a food it cannot properly digest. It carries a false thumb that evolved millions of years before its more famous cousins. It vanishes into trees so completely that researchers have spent decades just trying to count how many are left. This is the story of the animal that lent its name to the most recognizable conservation symbol on Earth, and is disappearing while almost nobody notices. This is the red panda. Start with the obvious assumption, because almost everyone makes it. Red panda. Giant panda. Same word, so surely the same family, a smaller, rustier cousin of the big black and white bear. It's a reasonable guess. It's also completely wrong. Genetically, the red panda isn't a bear at all. It isn't even particularly close to one. Molecular studies place it in its own family, Ailuridae, with no other living members, a family of one. Its nearest relatives, distant as they are, sit among the raccoons, the weasels, the otters, the skunks. If you lined up its family tree next to the giant pandas, the two would barely intersect. Two animals, evolving on separate branches for tens of millions of years, arriving at almost the same name by historical accident rather than shared blood. And the accident runs deeper than most people realize. The red panda didn't borrow the giant panda's name. It's the other way around. Cuvier described and named Ailurus fulgens in 1825. The giant panda wouldn't be formally documented for Western science until 1869, when a French missionary encountered one in Sichuan, and it wouldn't carry the word panda in English until 1901, 3/4 of a century after the red panda had already claimed it. For most of the 19th century, the giant panda was known by an entirely different name, the party-colored bear. Only after zoologists worked out that the two animals shared a similar wrist adaptation and a taste for bamboo did the newer, bigger animal quietly absorb the older one's title. The word panda itself likely comes from a Nepali phrase, Nigaliaponya, roughly meaning bamboo-eater or bamboo-footed, a name given to the small rust-colored animal in the Himalayan foothills long before Europeans had any concept of the giant one at all. So when people say the giant panda isn't a real panda as internet trivia, they're closer to the truth than they realize. Linguistically, historically, by right of first discovery, there is exactly one true panda. And it is not the one on the WWF logo. If the name is borrowed, the body underneath it is entirely original, and its story starts with a mystery humans didn't solve until they went looking in solid rock. Watch a red panda handle a stem of bamboo and you'll see something that looks, for a fraction of a second, like a human gripping a pencil. There's an opposable digit pressed against the palm, folding the stem into place. It looks like a thumb. It is not a thumb. No panda, red or giant, has 6 real fingers. What both animals have instead is a bone. Buried in the wrist of most mammals is a small, unremarkable knob called the radial sesamide, usually just an anchor point for tendons crossing the joint. In the panda lineages, that same bone grew. It lengthened, thickened, and developed its own cushion of muscle and fatty pad, until it could be pressed against the true fingers like a 6th digit. two unrelated families of carnivores, on separate evolutionary paths, independently reinvented the same solution to the same problem, one of the cleanest examples of convergent evolution in the entire mammal record. Here's where the detective work gets interesting. For a long time, scientists assumed the false thumb existed for one reason: gripping bamboo. Simple story, tidy explanation. Then paleontologists dug into the fossil record and found the ancestors. An extinct predator called Simosayan bateleri, a relative sitting on the red panda's side of the family tree, was carrying an enlarged radial sesamide as far back as roughly 9 million years ago, millions of years before the earliest known false thumb on the giant panda's side, found in the ancestral species Ailurus and dated to around 6 to 7 million years. And Simosayan wasn't eating bamboo. It was hunting animals, in trees, alongside predators considerably larger than itself. Its false thumb wasn't a fork. It was a climbing tool, a way to lock onto branches, escape competitors, and survive in a canopy that bigger, heavier carnivores couldn't follow it into. The bamboo gripping function came later, borrowed and repurposed from a structure that had originally evolved to save its owner's life in a tree, not to fill its stomach on the ground. The giant panda's thumb, by contrast, appears to have evolved directly for feeding, and never grew past a certain point, because it still had to double as a bone the animal walked on. Two thumbs. Two completely different reasons for existing. One shared shape. That climbing heritage still shows in the red panda's whole skeleton. Its front legs are turned slightly inward, an ideal angle for descending trees headfirst, a rare skill, one it shares with almost no other mammal outside a handful of specialized climbers. Its ankles rotate further than a cat's. Its tail, up to 2 feet long and nearly as long as its body, isn't just decoration, it's a counterweight, constantly shifting its center of gravity as it navigates branches barely wider than the paw gripping them. Everything about this animal was built for a life spent above the ground, in a world it could disappear into. Which makes what it actually eats up there almost cruelly ironic. Because here's the twist nobody expects. This is a carnivore. Structurally, internally, on every measure that matters to a digestive tract, the red panda's gut belongs to a meat eater. Short. Simple. No fermentation chamber, no multi-stage stomach, none of the specialized machinery a cow or a deer carries to break cellulose down into usable sugar. And yet, somewhere in its evolutionary past, this obligate meat-eater's descendant decided its main food source would be one of the toughest, least nutritious plants on the mountainside. Bamboo is almost entirely fiber. A red panda pushes that fiber through a gut that was never built to extract much from it, and the numbers back up just how badly the mismatch plays out. Researchers measuring the animal's actual digestive efficiency found it absorbs only around a quarter of the energy locked inside the bamboo it eats. A genuine herbivore, a deer or a goat with a properly adapted gut, pulls out roughly double or more from the same mouthful. The red panda is running a specialist's diet on a generalist predator's engine, and getting a fraction of the return for it. So how does an animal survive on a food source that barely feeds it? Not through brute force. Through relentless, almost obsessive compromise. It eats constantly, bamboo leaves and shoots making up the overwhelming bulk of its daily intake, mouthful after mouthful, because when each mouthful yields so little, volume becomes the only strategy left. It's selective when it can afford to be, favoring the most nutrient-dense parts of the plant, the tender young shoots of spring and summer over the tougher, less digestible leaves of winter, tracking the bamboo's own seasonal chemistry almost like a forager working a produce aisle by nutrition label. And on the metabolic side, it does something else entirely: it idles. For decades, biologists assumed a bamboo specialist with such poor digestion must have an unusually slow metabolism to match, engine turned down to survive on fumes. Recent field measurements complicated that picture. The red panda's resting metabolic rate, it turns out, sits roughly in line with other mammals its size, not dramatically suppressed the way older lab studies once suggested. What is different is behavior. It rests. For long stretches of the day, especially through the coldest months, it does almost nothing at all, curled into a tight ball on a branch, bushy tail wrapped forward over its nose and face like a built-in scarf, metabolic engine ticking over just enough to stay warm and stay alive until the next feeding window opens. Survival, for this animal, isn't a chase or a kill. It's arithmetic, run 20 hours a day, with almost no margin for error. That arithmetic gets harder the moment something else wants to eat the red panda instead. Because for all its climbing skill, this is a small animal in a landscape with serious predators, clouded leopards moving through the same canopy, snow leopards patrolling the higher slopes, martens quick enough to follow it into thinner branches. A red panda cannot outrun most of what hunts it, and it cannot outfight any of it in a fair contest. So it doesn't try to. What it has instead is a sequence, a small, precise operation built entirely around not fighting until the very last possible second. First, it freezes, banking on camouflage. That reddish coat that looks so vivid on camera actually blends remarkably well into the reddish moss and lichen coating Himalayan fir branches, and a dark underside breaks up its silhouette from below, where a predator on the ground might be looking up. If freezing fails, it runs into the smallest, thinnest branches available, terrain its low weight and specialized wrist can handle and a heavier predator physically cannot follow into. Only when neither option is left does it commit to the final stage, rising onto its hind legs, forepaws lifted, claws exposed, hissing and puffing itself up to look as large as a house cat-sized animal possibly can. It's a bluff, mostly. But it's a calculated one. Time to the exact moment retreat is no longer available, the same tactical patience, ironically, that its ancestors once needed to survive in a canopy crowded with bigger, hungrier competitors millions of years before bamboo ever entered the picture. Survive long enough between predators and metabolism, and you start to notice something else about this animal: it is almost entirely alone. Red pandas don't form packs, prides, or family groups the way so many mammals do. Outside of a mother raising cubs for their first year, or a brief window during the winter mating season, adults spend the overwhelming majority of their lives without ever directly encountering another of their own kind. And yet they are not isolated from each other. They're in constant contact, just not the kind you can see. Scattered through their territory, on tree trunks and rock faces at nose height, red pandas leave messages using scent glands near the base of the tail and on the soles of their feet, essentially journaling in chemistry for anyone who passes afterward. Who's nearby, whether that individual is ready to mate, whose territory this actually is, an entire social life running on a channel invisible to a human observer, conducted by animals who may never meet the conversation partner they're leaving notes for. That solitary instinct doesn't disappear in captivity, but personality does start to show, in ways that made global headlines. In June 2013, a not quite one-year-old male red panda named Rusty vanished overnight from what zookeepers at the Smithsonian's National Zoo in Washington, D.C. had genuinely believed was an escape-proof enclosure. Heavy rain the night before had bent the branches of the trees in his habitat low enough toward the perimeter that his climbing ability, the same skill his ancestors evolved to outmaneuver predators millions of years earlier, did the rest. By the next afternoon, Rusty was spotted several blocks away, wandering through the trendy Adams Morgan neighborhood in broad daylight, apparently unbothered by a city of 200,000 people. He was located in a tree and safely returned within roughly 24 hours, but not before the story had gone fully viral. A small, reddish animal outsmarting a world-class zoo, cheerfully indifferent to human infrastructure, capturing more public affection in one weekend than most endangered species manage in a decade. Rusty would go on to live another 9 years, eventually fathering cubs of his own at a different zoo in Colorado. His single night of freedom made him, briefly, one of the most famous animals in America. Which raises an uncomfortable question about the species he represented, and about exactly what kind of fame actually helps an animal survive. Here is the central contradiction sitting underneath everything about this creature. The red panda is, by almost any measure of pop culture visibility, one of the most beloved animals on the internet, instantly recognizable, endlessly photographed, its face used as an emoji, a browser mascot nickname, a fixture of world's cutest animal lists that circulate every single year. And it is, at the exact same time, sliding toward extinction largely unnoticed. Its more famous cousin, the animal that took its name and its cultural spotlight, has spent the last decade as one of conservation's biggest headline successes, when the giant panda's population climbed enough for the IUCN to downgrade its status from endangered to vulnerable in 2016, it made news everywhere. Meanwhile, the red panda, the original owner of the word panda, carrying arguably no less public affection, has never received anything close to that scale of coordinated protection, funding, or global attention, and its numbers have kept sliding the entire time. Estimates vary wildly, because this is an animal that is genuinely difficult to count in the wild, but the consistent thread across nearly every survey is a population decline somewhere in the range of 40 to 50% over the past 2 decades, with best current estimates suggesting fewer than 10,000 mature individuals left, and some assessments placing the real number closer to a few thousand. This is the paradox the entire species is trapped inside: fame without protection. Adoration without action. An animal beloved enough to have its face on a coffee mug in every airport gift shop, and endangered enough that the mug might outlast the species it depicts. Some of what's driving the decline traces directly back to human hands, and not always in the way you'd expect. Habitat loss and fragmentation from logging and land conversion remain the largest threat by far. Carving the Himalayan forest belt, the red panda depends on into smaller, disconnected islands too small to support genetically healthy populations, pushing isolated groups toward inbreeding as they run out of unrelated mates to find. But there's an older, stranger thread woven through this too. In parts of Yunnan and Sichuan, a local tradition holds that a groom wearing a hat made from red panda fur and tail on his wedding day brings good luck to the marriage. It's a custom with real cultural weight behind it, and it has quietly fueled a fur trade that persists in pockets today, even though hunting red pandas has been illegal in every country where they live for decades. Add to that the modern pressure of an illegal exotic pet trade, cubs pulled from the forest to be sold, at enormous mortality cost during capture and transport, into a market that treats a wild, specialized climbing animal as a novelty accessory, and a third threat that's easy to overlook entirely: domestic dogs. As villages and grazing herds push further into red panda habitat, dogs following them carry diseases like canine distemper into forest populations that have no immunity and no way to escape it. None of these threats, on their own, is as visually dramatic as a chainsaw through old-growth forest. Together, they're quietly doing just as much damage. Zoom out far enough, and the red panda's disappearance stops being just one species story and starts looking like an early warning for an entire ecosystem. It occupies a narrow, specific slice of the Himalayan temperate forest, high-altitude, bamboo understory habitat between roughly 8 and 13,000 feet, cool, wet, and increasingly hard to find intact. Conservationists treat it as something close to an indicator species for that habitat's health. Where you find a stable red panda population, you're generally finding an intact forest supporting a much wider community of life around it. Camera trap surveys set up primarily to monitor red pandas in Nepal have, almost as a side effect, turned up other rare and elusive animals sharing the same fragile understory, evidence that protecting this one small, oddly specialized animal ends up protecting far more than itself. It's formally recognized as the state animal of Sikkim, in northeastern India, a piece of cultural status that predates most of its current internet fame by decades. And now climate change is adding a new pressure on top of the old ones, pushing suitable temperature bands further up the mountainside each decade, squeezing an animal that already lives near the ceiling of its habitable range into an ever thinner strip of forest, with nowhere higher left to retreat to. So return, for a moment, to that crate in Paris in 1825, and the zoologist who called this animal the most beautiful he'd ever seen. 2 centuries later, the name he gave it belongs to someone else in the public imagination, borrowed by a bear that arrived to fame nearly half a century after this animal already had. The original still climbs the same misty slopes its ancestors climbed 9 million years ago, still solving the same math problem every single day: how to survive on a food that barely feeds it, in a body built for a completely different life. It never asked to share its name with anything. It certainly never agreed to be forgotten underneath it. The real question isn't whether the world can fall in love with a red panda. That part's already been won 1,000 times over, one photo at a time. The question is whether that love ever turns into the kind of protection its far more famous, far less endangered namesake already has. So here's what I actually want to know from you: if you had heard, before this video, that the real panda was the small red one, and that it's in more danger than the giant black and white bear wearing its name, would that have changed anything about how you thought of either animal? Tell me in the comments. And if this is the first time you've properly met the original panda, it's probably not the last time you'll think about it, so subscribe, because there's a lot more of the natural world still hiding behind the names we thought we already knew.